Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Burns, truly one of America's great diplomats. But, Nick, I noticed you didn't mention that I ran for president, which, as you know, I was gone after the third primary. I used to tell people in that presidential race, I had two problems, Obama and Clinton. But I remind people, and this reminds me of New Hampshire. You know, we used to have these debates and these town meetings, and I love those great events. I like to also say that it was a wonderful experience, and I hope that in some of the Q's and A's we can talk about it. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a very prestigious audience. Had I realized how prestigious it was, I would have written a speech. But, you know, besides Nick, I want to just acknowledge some friends that are here. Of course, I see Governor DuPont is here. I made him a little mad because I called him my favorite Republican earlier. Amory Lovins, who is one of your speakers, one of the great energy thinkers. I'm going to talk a little bit about energy. Ambassador Beth Jones, who is one of our outstanding diplomats, Larry Wilkerson, so many others, Clyde Preskowitz on trade, so many of you that I know I will get in trouble. I want to thank Randy and Andrew, who are my hosts here. I was asked to talk about, one, the issue of gridlock, which I think we can all talk about. But one of the things I'm going to try to do in my talk is propose some solutions. You know, politicians come and go, and they can tell you the end of the world, the problems, how serious things are. Obviously, they are. And I think this title is very apt. Do we have what it takes, America in the 21st century? I will answer it. I will say yes, because I'm an optimist about this country. But I also think it's going to take some dramatic leadership, some changes in our political system, and some boldness that I believe is part of our body politic that somehow has not surfaced. I also want to say something about this wonderful part of America. You know, I came up from Cape Cod. Ever since I left the government, we live in Santa Fe, and I've been doing all those nice things. By the way, Nick, that was a very accurate introduction. Thank you. Very, very apt. That's supposed to be funny. I guess it wasn't. But I want to just tell you that I left this morning at 8:30 in the morning, and I got in at 4. So I would like to suggest that you all consider getting maybe a little airport. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, it's not easy to get here, but this is the part of, I should talk coming from Santa Fe, from New Mexico. But I think this is one of the great outposts and one of the great parts of this country. All right, so the dysfunctionality of the political process. By the way, I also want to make this a good speech because I don't want Mac DeFord to trash me in the local paper soon. And, you know, by the way, one of his brother, Frank DeFord, I mean, everybody talks about Hemingway, the great authors. You ought to read Frank DeFord in Sports Illustrated when he talks about Muhammad Ali and Mickey Mantle. It's poetry, it's beauty, it's football, it's America. And so, Mac, write something good, will you? Dysfunctionality. Why? You know, a lot of people say, all right, there's a lack of bipartisanship, no question. I served in the Congress. I've never seen it as bad. The division between parties, the animosity, the executive branch, legislative branch not working with each other. In fact, finding ways to degrade each other on a daily basis. Why? Have you ever thought about why do we think this is happening? Well, here's my theory. One, the rise of cable and the vitriol that it spews to attract more viewership, fundraising, the need for both parties and candidates to raise funds. And I want to tell you that in politics these days, if you want to get ahead, if you want to get more votes, if you want to beat your opponent, if you want to raise more money, you have to be negative. Being positive won't do it. It's unfortunate. And I have a lot of people that come to me and say, well, Bill, I noticed you had a negative ad about your opponent. The people don't like that. That's not the case. They do, and it's statistically proven. But it's magnified more at this time when I think you have more outlets. You have social media, which I think has been very constructive, especially in the Arab Spring. But you also have both parties striving to outdo each other. And the way you do that is, again, by spewing negativity. That's how you attract more donors. That's how you attract more viewership. And unfortunately, that is translated into the halls of the Congress. Now, when I was in the Congress, I remember that we all got along. We disagreed, but after 6 o'clock, we'd go to dinner together. We were encouraged in those days by the speaker and the leaders to keep our families in Washington. Go back home on weekends, but keep the families in Washington. This is the opposite today. If you look at the Congress, they arrive on Tuesday. They leave on Thursday. They have one day to legislate. That day is spent either fundraising or it's spent finding ways to go on cable and trash each other or on the floor of the Congress. And I think you're seeing that where members don't actually know each other. The families don't know each other. So it's easier to get negative. That started in the 90s and continues today. Now, I don't have all the answers as to why this continues, but it is part also the fault of the two parties. And the Democratic Party, a party I'm proud of, but for the last few years, the Democratic Party, I think, has been trying to find its identity. Are we going to compromise? Are we centrists? Are we liberals or progressives? Are we going to be pro-growth or redistribution? It's sort of a lack of a firm identity. I think we're moving in that direction, in the right direction, but still, I think that has caused a softness in the party as to where we stand. The Republican Party, on the other hand, I think has moved to the right dramatically. Radicalization. I'm going to try to be as nonpartisan as possible, but I see this in the Republican Party, the rise of the Tea Party, the rise of who's the most conservative is going to win, who is the most Tea Party endorsed is going to do best. And I see something that I used to see as very healthy in our political process, and that's the moderate Republican. That's the Rockefeller Republican. That is the coalition that built with Democrats our national parks, our environmental system, that had a foreign policy where we said partisanship ends at the water's edge. That doesn't exist anymore. And this body politic of division is stretched into international affairs, where if you look at almost all of the president's initiatives, except going after bin Laden and finding him, and al-Qaeda deaths and other terrorism ventures, most of the other foreign policy issues have drifted into partisanship, when in fact I think they've been success. The mission in Libya, as Nick mentioned, the withdrawal of our troops in Iraq and moving that way in Afghanistan, the nuclear weapons treaties with Russia, the initiatives that I believe have moved forward in areas of eliminating nuclear materials, the sanctions on Iran, which are working, I think for the first time. They're working because they have teeth and they're biting. The international coalition that we've assembled to do that. Still, it is not enough and drifts into this partisanship. So what I wanted to say was, I have 30 minutes. Have I gone 18 minutes? I got 20 left. Oh, okay. 20. Okay, all right. Okay, good. Jeez. So I want to stick to that. So we have that division. We have in the international economic system, I think this collapse of the euro, and in American economy, in the American economic system, we have a huge debate where right now rational economic thinking and what we're going to do in the Congress is not moving. The president's job bill, dead. Private sector jobs, dead. Initiatives to give small businesses tax incentives, dead. In fact, the Congress has said, we have ended our work. We're just going to pass a payroll tax for 1 year, and that's it. Maybe unemployment compensation. And the Congress right now, its approval rating is at 10%. 10%. So I've outlined these problems, and I'm going to now look at the 3 areas that I think we have to look at that have been cataclysmic in our body politic internationally and nationally. And then I'm going to go into the path forward, because I think we want to talk about what America can do. These are the 3 areas. One is good, the other 2 are not so good. The first is the Arab Spring. I think that's been good for the world, and I think it's been good for America. Although in a very good piece in the Boston Globe today, Nick Burns writes that Syria and Egypt, that we have real challenges there. They haven't quite turned out as we wanted to, especially in Egypt. But I think what's happened with the Arab Spring is healthy. It's the future direction of movements in the world. It means that coalitions of the willing, rather than institutions, the NATOs of the world, the UNs, the coalitions of the willing, a combination of countries, with NGOs, with people, with social media, with Facebook, are what's transforming the world. And it's transformed Yemen, it's transformed Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria probably eventually. And somehow I think America has to attach itself to that movement, being and recognizing the importance of our strategic objectives. I think this is something that will happen eventually in Iran, and hopefully before too long in Syria. I was really happy when I saw that, I was unhappy that at the United Nations, when it was proposed to have sanctions on Syria, 2 countries vetoed, China and Russia. I think to their great damage in the Middle East. And so what we said is, all right, we're going to go out of the UN system and build a coalition of the willing, of other countries, of NGOs, of religious groups. And I think that is the right way to go. But I think what has transformed the body politic is that Arab Spring, and we should be, as much as we can, a part of it. Now, there are risks. It's not perfect. The second is the international economic system, the collapse of the euro, our domestic situation here at home. What are we going to do about it? Well, we can't go to the EU and dictate that they change the euro or take the leadership role away from Germany and France. But I think what needs to evolve is a real rationalization of the existing financial institutions that we have in the world. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the various European international components of how to fix problems like debt, like dealing with redistributing ways that human beings can live on a more equitable basis. What I'm saying is that we haven't examined these institutions since World War II, the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations. When I was at the United Nations as ambassador, I think we did a smart thing. We said, there are 5 countries that are part of the UN Security Council. Let's expand it. The world isn't run by the US, by China, by Russia, by Britain, by France. What about Latin America? What about Brazil or Mexico? In Africa? What about Nigeria? What about South Africa? What about South Asia, India or Pakistan? Let's expand it, maybe not give them veto power, but recognize that the power centers of the world are changing. It's the Brazils, it's the Turkeys, it's the developing countries in Africa that are screaming for recognition. It's countries across the globe that somehow have been left out and neglected. So What I believe we need to do in the international economic system is move towards institutions that focus on jobs, on economic growth, on entrepreneurship, as opposed to debt and infrastructure, funding big infrastructure projects. Finding ways that the IMF looks at issues like education, improving educational systems, renewable energy, finding ways like Brazil has done to become a nation that literally is run in renewable energy, finding ways that we deal with the issues of health and nutrition, that we deal with the poorest of the poor, instead of ways that today our international economic system is focused on big loans, and you've got Germany saying the way we're going to get Athens and Greece to survive is just squeeze them to death, get rid of the pension systems, get rid of the unions, find ways to cut government spending. You can't do that alone. You have to have stimulus. You have to have a fair trade. You have to find ways, I believe, that an international economic system works to deal with one of the fundamental problems that exist, and that is the human beings today not being able to survive economically because of great gaps between the rich and the poor. And we have to find ways to do it, and I believe the United States can lead. The last area is energy. Now, Amory Lovins will hopefully talk about it tomorrow, but two cataclysmic events have happened in energy that are troublesome. One is Fukushima, what happened in Japan. I think it hurt nuclear power, certainly in Europe. I think there's more concerns and questions about it at a time when nuclear power was not emitting greenhouse gas emissions, was moving up. And all of a sudden in Europe, especially in countries like Germany and others, its strength is diminished dramatically. What's it going to do in the United States? You know, it's still questionable whether we build no more nuclear power plants. But the safety issue and the issue of what do we do with the waste, the cost of nuclear power plants, this has been a vital source of energy, 20% in our country. And in the world, it's close to 26%. So that is questionable. The second is oil as a political weapon by the Iranians. The fact that Iran is serious about saying to countries like Spain, like France, like others that are threatening sanctions on them, okay, we're going to cut off your oil. And we're going to do something with the Straits of Hormuz. We're going to block it. And I think that has caused, apart from the strategic response that we have to look at, is the volatility of the price of oil. It's going to stay over $100. This is terrible for the third world, for consuming nations in Europe. The United States is a producer and a consumer. So we have to make a dramatic shift, and the body politic has not been ready to do that. I think that shift has to be to natural gas. It has to be towards renewable energy. But renewable energy is also being questioned. I think that's good, but at the same time, I do think that renewable energy, solar, wind, biofuels, is the answer. And everywhere I go, I was just in Cape Cod, a wind turbine farm was rejected. And I remember in the presidential race, I said something about, I supported that wind project in Martha's Vineyard. I got a call from Teddy Kennedy, who was my mentor. He was not happy. So we have the traditional sources right now in a state of some kind of turmoil. And so the emphasis should be on energy efficiency, on climate change, on finding ways to improve our fuel standards. So there's a paradigm of shifting priorities that we have to deal with. Okay, so the way forward. What do we do? What do I see as the main challenges where America can lead? One, I think the challenges Nikki mentioned, the Chinas, the Middle East, I think the main challenges we faced are transnational. They cut across countries, their movements, more necessarily than countries. And I'll miss a few, but here's where they are. First, immigration. I know nobody likes to talk about it. This is not a big issue here in Maine. Canada, Maine. I think the issues are on my border. They're in New Mexico, they're in California, they're in Arizona, they're in Texas, but they're national. Immigrants are in every part of this country. And unless we resolve this issue with a plan, we got to tighten our borders. But we also, what are we going to do with the 12 million people that are here illegally? We got to throw them out? We got to round them up, and as some say in these debates, and export them out? That's not going to happen. I think we have to find a way to recognize that those that pay taxes and pass background checks and learn English and embrace American ideals and have lived a certain period of time and are part of the American economic mainstream, find a way to stay, not to become citizens, but to seek a path, a sensible path. So that's one that nobody likes to talk about. It's, Central America, it's Mexico, but it's one that I think America can lead, and the only way this will happen is in a bipartisan way. And my hope is that after the elections, after a lot of political parties see how Hispanics and growing numbers have voted, they will see that this is an issue along with education, the DREAM Act, allowing immigrant kids to find a way to be educated, can be part of the American dream. So that's one. The second is climate change. Obviously, this is an issue that is stalled because the big powers, America, India, China, are not doing enough, especially in America. We can't pass a climate change bill, and so a lot of states, I was very proud. In New Mexico, I was the first state to observe the Kyoto Treaty. I did it by executive order. Not to mention that my governor now is trying to undo it, and she probably will. But still, I think this is somewhere that America can lead. And the next sessions in Durban, I think, are going to be critical. I think after the election, whoever wins, and I think I will tell you who I think will have an opportunity to make energy and immigration major initiatives in pushing for leadership that have to be dealt with. Terrorism, we've made important strides. Al-Qaeda, many of their top leadership has been outed, but it's still a threat. But I think you're seeing more multinational response. You're seeing results, a bold strategy, outstanding intelligence work. I think one of the unsung heroes is our intelligence community in finding these individuals. And they, I believe, deserve every dollar that they get for the work that they do. But I think that has been very positive, the whole terrorism approach. Nuclear proliferation, Iran, North Korea. One of the things Nick mentioned is President Clinton used to send me to talk to Saddam Hussein, to the North Koreans, to Cuba. He used to say, bad people like Richardson, we'll send them there. But I have found in these dealings, and this is another axiom of my political philosophy, you talk to your enemies. You dialogue with your enemies. Now, doesn't mean that when you're spurned, like Iran has spurned us, you keep trying to talk. I mean, we honestly tried, but it didn't happen. I think we need to talk to North Korea. If we don't talk to North Korea, they're going to be more isolated. They're a country that is repressed, massive human rights violations, but they have 6 nuclear weapons. They have 1.3 million men in arms. They're unpredictable. Their leaders are not mainstream. So it's better to engage them, to talk to them, than to say, we're going to sanction you to death. We're going to just push you. And then the greatest fallacy of our policy in the past, bipartisan, has been, Nikki, how am I doing? I have 5 minutes?
I'll let you know.
All right. I'm almost done. That the greatest fallacy is that we use with North Korea is, okay, let the Chinese, they'll handle the North Koreans. North Koreans hate the Chinese. They're invaders. They want to talk to us. Now, that doesn't mean we talk to them and say we're going to reward them, but it means that we engage and see where we end up. They don't always keep their word. In fact, they probably won't most of the time. But you don't want to isolate a country that is dangerous. We have to also, as I mentioned, deal with energy, shifting from fossil fuels to renewables, to energy efficiency. I'd like Amory maybe to talk about nuclear power, where he sees that future. I think the future is going to be bridge fuels like natural gas that will get us to renewables. But the problem with natural gas is some questions on fracking, on how you find some of this gas and make it clean and not contaminate the water. I think technology needs to play a more important role. And I think it's important that we move very much in that direction and let science make this decision and not others. So we move forward and look at Latin America and Africa. You know, I was talking to Andy, who spent a lot of time in Africa. We neglect Africa and we neglect Latin America, and I think it's a mistake. If you look at some of the big problems that affect America and affect the world, maybe they're not sexy problems, but they're problems that need to be dealt with. They deal with poverty, they deal with endemic diseases, they deal with AIDS, they deal with sexual trafficking, genital mutilation of young women. They deal with sex abuse, prostitution, many that deal with health and women and children. Did you know that today in Africa, there are 6 wars going on? 6. Does anybody talk about them? The Congo, Southern Africa, 6. 6 altercations that involve some countries holding off humanitarian aid to starve human beings to gain political advantage. That's happening in Somalia. Yet somehow, with Africa, we don't talk about the world's one of the 8th largest oil producers in the world, Nigeria, and the Niger Delta and the environmental contamination. We don't talk about the Congo and the rapes in the Congo, massive rapes. We don't talk about the rights of those that are dispossessed in a region of the world that somehow we neglect. And then Latin America, because this is our region. And I saw an article by a very respected Republican, Senator Richard Lugar, in the Miami Herald today, where he said, what is the United States doing about Iran messing around in Latin America? Ahmadinejad is going to Nicaragua, he's gone to Cuba, he's gone to Ecuador, and he's gone to Venezuela. What is he doing? I think what he's doing is realizing that the sanctions are hurting him, and so he's looking for new markets, and he's trying to scare us. But nonetheless, this is of concern. But we've neglected this region. We've neglected it, and this is bipartisan. This isn't just Democrats and it's Republicans, it's everybody. We neglect it on issues relating to free trade, and we need to have fairer trade. We neglect it when it comes to immigration. We neglect Cuba. I mean, this embargo has not worked. Let's get rid of it, but it's politically impossible. Yet at the same time, Castro continues to be repressive. Yet we don't find time to deal with that issue. What about the emerging countries like Brazil, like Argentina, like Chile? Burgeoning, stronger economies that could be great markets for us. But somehow we say, well, you know, let's stick around in the Middle East and NATO and Asia and China. And somehow in Central America, right now, the source in border states of most of the gangs are Central American kids that don't have jobs. So why don't we find some entrepreneurial initiatives for those kids, for those young people in Central America and in Mexico, at least to curb the movement into the United States and into some of our border states. So I've thrown out a lot of issues. In some ways, I've thrown out some solutions, but I do think the answer is yes. Do we have what it takes? Yes. But it's going to take bipartisanship. And my last point, is that 11 seconds, Nick? I got? Jesus. My last point is that I think this election is going to send a message. This election in November. This is what I think this election is going to say. It's going to say that the American people want bipartisanship, that they're sick of the inaction, that they're sick of the two political parties, and unless they straighten out, they're going to move towards a third party, or they're going to move towards this. I bet you this online candidates, there's some online movement. I think it'll do better than most people think. I think there'll be massive dislocations in the Congress. I think they'll stay the same. The Senate will stay by a close margin Democratic. I think the House may shift dramatically. But I think you will see a message sent that says, we want this country to work itself out of problems, end these divisions. That's my prediction, and I hope I'm right. And now I'll give you the best part of my speech. The end. Thank you. Okay. Should I go over there?
Well done. Governor, thank you very much for a very thoughtful speech, provocative, entertaining. Now you have a chance to ask the governor some questions. So while you think of your questions, and we'll have microphones going around, just one rule. If you just state your name, we would appreciate it if the question could be brief and that a question mark might be attached to the end of it. We particularly want to hear from students. We have people in Ellsworth and Belfast and Rockland, and we'll take questions from them as well. I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to ask the first question. I promised Bill it would be a softball. Here it is. And it really, I think, is the overlay of this conference bill about America's global leadership. If you read our press and listen to a lot of the academic experts, including some people where I teach, there's an assumption out there that we don't have what it takes to remain the world's greatest power. That somehow China's going to overtake us, either by GDP, by 2025, or in some other dimension. That India and Brazil are rising to global power, that our best days are over. It's not going to be the American century as Mitt Romney is saying it's going to be. Is that accurate? Are you more optimistic than that? Do we have what it takes to remain the world's greatest power? Because it means a lot to the rest of the world, I think, that we remain the most powerful nation in the world.
Well, on that last point, Nick, I was just at a conference in Abu Dhabi. It was one of those World Economic Conference, Davos conference. By the way, they're not the greatest things you think they are, but some of them are worth attending. A lot of people that like to talk to each other. Anyway, I don't want to get re-invited, so I should be careful. There, I met with a lot of Chinese businessmen, leaders, political leaders. They want America to take the lead. I mean, they're not ready. They say it. We may later, but we want you to take the lead. So the perception of other nations, of other institutions, is that we lead. Now, what I am saying is we should lead, but how do we lead? And where I think we should lead is we should not be always the stickler for let's do it through NATO, let's do it through the World Bank and the IMF and the existing institutions. Let's do it through the Arab Spring movements. Let's find young people and women and social media and NGOs and political movements and some countries that are with us, like with Syria. Let's find a way to topple Assad with social media and with Arab Springs. That's how I think we need to lead, different ways of achieving the goal of leading. Let's say openly, look, the UN, for God's sakes, let's open it up. Let's make it more responsive. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, which I think has moved in the right direction. Maybe we find some new institutions.
Good. Okay, that's a good start. I take that as a yes, that we will remain the world's greatest power. We're both optimists. Yes, sir. And there'll be a mic coming right to you. If you could use the mic, because the people at the remote locations won't be able to hear us without it.
Thank you very much for your fine talk. There's a strong argument that the greatest risk to our national security is not military, but rather bankruptcy. Would you talk to that?
All right, well, there's no question that we've got serious economic problems in this country. But I will say to you, I've been pleased recently looking at economic indicators. The joblessness, unemployment has come down. Foreclosures have come down. The banks are starting to move money more. I saw the report yesterday that General Motors had its record profit. Although I will say to you, you know where most of those sales went to? China. Chinese love Buicks, by the way.
It's good.
It's true. That's
good.
I don't know why, but they do. And so the issue is the bankruptcy issue, the debt. You know, one of the reasons, there were several. I didn't do well in some of the Iowa caucuses. I said, I'm for a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. I said this 4 years ago in the Democratic primary. You know, I didn't do too well, but I like to remind Vice President Biden I got more votes than he did. The debt is the overriding issue. If you look at the Bowles-Simpson proposal that deals with entitlements, that deals with spending, that deals with revenues, I think that is a prescription that my hope is the next Congress after the presidential election will say that we will do a 12 to 15-year plan to adopt those Bowles-Simpson initiatives. If we don't do it, I think we're going to be in danger. You're right. We are hurting, but I think the emphasis has to be a shift from just spending cuts and just saying no new taxes to job creation, to entrepreneurship, to finding ways that public-private partnerships exist. See, I'm not one of those that think that government should just step out and let the private sector do everything. I think government can be a catalyst, can be a partner, can get out of the way when it's over-regulating. But I do see, I guess the word is a catalytic role for government. I believe in tax incentives for renewable energy, for job creation. It's okay to make money building solar plants and solar homes and energy efficiency. But look, I think this is a serious problem. If we don't address this deficit, the Congress was unable to, that super committee vanished, but I think that it looks good for right after the election. That's my view.
Bill, can I ask you a quick follow-up? This
Yeah.
is a great question, and we'll discuss it tomorrow, too. You made the point that we're in political gridlock, nothing's going to be done in 2012, but whether it's President Obama being reelected or Governor Romney or Senator Santorum, is there a deal in 2013 to reduce entitlement expenditures and raise taxes? That's been the center of the political battle.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a deal very close that I think the president took a lot of heat from Democrats that kind of collapsed right before they did that last deal. Yeah, I think the ingredients are there, and either a new Congress or a new attitude by the American people, I think is going to push the two parties into a deal. Will it be totally excellent, sufficient? No, but it'll move us in the right direction. But nothing can happen until after the election. Nothing.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Charlie Graham, Camden. Many Americans see the UN as another scene of a lot of gridlock and dysfunction. As a former ambassador there, how do you see the future of America's foreign affairs with the UN having a role in it?
Well, I'm very pro-UN. Actually, it's the best job I ever had. I remember President Clinton calling me and saying, you need to go to the Department of Energy. And I said, but I love the UN. He says, you need to go to the Department of Energy. And I said, well, why? I said, I don't know anything about energy. I did. a little bit. But he says, well, you're Hispanic. And I said, so? He said, well, the Hispanic leader of the energy department is leaving, so you got to go there. Anyway, I did know something about energy. But my point there with the UN is that why is it good? The UN is a good vehicle. If we're going to achieve our foreign policy goals, we want allies at the UN, in the Security Council, with developing and developed countries. There's where we pick up the allies. Secondly, if there's a crisis, Libya, Syria, within a day, even though you have these countries vetoing initiatives, you have diplomacy, discussion taking place. And then lastly, on the good side, these issues that I talked about, women's rights, endemic diseases, AIDS, this is the forum of the third world at the UN that is healthy. Now, what does the UN have to do? They got to get more efficient financially. Number two, countries have to start dumping their political appointees there and put good people there. Third, as I said, expand the Security Council. For God's sakes, I mean, what are you going to say? Brazil isn't a major power? Germany and Japan, they probably should get in. But Europe fights, no. And then Italy says, well, we put in countries in the Security Council that lost wars. What about us? Or that won wars. What was the Italian argument? Remember?
That was one of them.
Okay.
Okay. I think we're going to take a question, if I'm not mistaken, from one of our remote locations. And it's from Tim Donahue from Holliston, Massachusetts, who's in one of the remote locations. When will change come to North Korea? What do you expect to happen?
When will change come to North Korea? What do I expect? Anybody that tells you they're an expert on North Korea, even though I've been there 9 or 10 times, it's so isolated. It's like the 50s. Walk down the street here in Camden and imagine being in the 50s. That's North Korea. There are hardly any lights on the street, few vehicles, television 2 hours a day, all programmed by the state. Most everybody's either in the military or they live on rations, agriculture that is inefficient. It's the world's poorest country. But they say, well, that's right for Arab Spring, for new ideas. Well, the leadership doesn't allow the internet. They control all the media. So, so my point is it going to change? I don't think so. I think this new leader there, the son of Kim Jong-il, his name is Kim Jong-un, I don't know him, is going to stay. They're already making the transition. Do I know if he's a good leader? I don't know. The only good thing I know about the guy is that he was educated in Switzerland, that he knows more than one language. I think that's good. I've never talked to him. I've never talked to anyone that has talked to him. But so far, there is an announcement 2 days ago that the United States on February 23rd is going to talk to the North Koreans in Beijing. I think that's good. Talk to them, engage them. Don't say we're going to do it with a six-party talks. Just talk to them directly, even though if you don't get far. That hopefully the six-party talks, that is Russia, China, South Korea, North Korea, Japan, and the U.S. get together, talk about freezing North Korea's nuclear development in exchange for food aid. They're starving. What they need the most is rice. They need milk. They need food because a lot of the population is starving. Now, what else do I know? All I know is that I think it makes sense to realize that you've got to talk to them. If you isolate them, if you trash them, if you put more sanctions on them, you talk to them about nuclear materials, about stop selling nuclear materials to Syria, to Pakistan, you may get somewhere. They're going to ask for something in return. If it's fuel, if it's food, make the deal.
Good. Next question. Yes, sir. And we'll go to the balcony first, and then we'll come to you. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is David Marr, Unity College. I have a policy question. Can you see an investment in green infrastructure in the near future to spur economic growth?
The answer is yes. And we have this in many ways. The most controversial, have you ever heard of Solyndra? This is the solar energy. And I raise it because it was trashed. There was an investment by the Department of Energy loan guarantees in this company that eventually went bankrupt, a solar energy company. I think we got to take risks. And I believe when it comes to promoting energy efficiency, when it promotes fuel standards in vehicles, when it promotes green jobs, when it promotes steel workers revamping homes, these are investments that make sense, that create employment, and that are good, sensible energy policy. In the same way, I think light rail is a positive investment. I see you guys have trains here. You should have told me before I arrived, which is good. But the answer is yes, and we need to do dramatically more.
Thank you. We'll go to the back, and then I will come back to you. Thank you. Yes?
Ken Brill from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Where is he?
Right there.
Oh.
One of your former constituents.
Yes, right. The question I had to do is, has to do with ethics. And we seem to be having, either it's better reported, or we seem to, in the last 10 years, much more ethical lapses in the part of our leaders. What do you think about that? What can be done about it? Is that just the way things are?
You know, here's where I think the central problem is. It's fundraising. We need campaign finance reform. We need public financing. I don't think it's going to happen, but we need to do that. Because, what happens is there's such an obsession to raise money for the next race. I've called a number of senators in the last few days just on policy issues, and I find that they're not in the Senate. They're at a law firm calling and raising money because they can't do it in Senate grounds. I mean, just the physical time that it takes. So I think the way you act is campaign finance reform. At the state level, you see a lot of states advancing more than the feds. Will it happen soon? Unfortunately, we're going the other way with the super PACs. These super PACs can now, as long as Gingrich, Romney, Obama, as long as the super PAC director doesn't say, Mr. President or Mr. Romney, we're going to do an ad trashing your opponent. As long as you don't tell them, that can happen. If you tell them, that's a violation, but nobody's going to know anyway. So it's gotten more unhealthy. And first, the undoing of the super PACs, but that's going to take a Supreme Court decision, because that's what made it happen in the Citizens case. So that, I think, is the most fundamental change. Obviously, there are others, like, banning insider trading. I didn't know you could do that if you're a congressman. You could take advantage of insider trading. I thought that's terrible. That never should have happened. But I guess it's the case.
Yes, sir.
Clay Stranger with Rocky Mountain Institute. A decade from now, or 2 decades from now, what do you imagine could characterize a cooperative relationship between the U.S. and China? A cooperative and positive, mutually positive relationship between the U.S. and China?
Yeah. I think the first thing we have to do is admit that China is a strategic competitor. They're not a friend, but they're not a foe. How's that for a political answer? But what does that mean? That means that we need to have to find a way to deal with them. And you can't say, okay, you got to be nice to them or you got to be bad to them. You got to look at case by case all the areas where we have relationships. One is the debt relationship. I worry that we are so in debt and China's carrying the debt that one of these days they're going to leverage us, and I don't know what we're going to do. I hope we have a policy response ready. But that is, I think, the one that is most worrisome. I think the other area is North Korea. We need to work together on that. Other areas, economic issues, renewable energy. They're a strategic competitor. They're a country that, on human rights, I think we should not tolerate what they're doing, and we should say so. At the same time, you don't want to totally get them so they don't talk to us. But I think if America stands by its values, if we stand by our institutions, if we push them to have a freer press and freer elections, that's healthy, because that's also good for us. I see in the energy area, China is building a lot of new nuclear plants, but they're also the most advanced in solar energy. Right now, they're committing the most. And I think that is healthy. So it's a very important relationship that we need to manage on a case-by-case basis. Retaliation, name-calling, trade sanctions. Clyde maybe has some views. I think we have to exercise some trade sanction options that we have when it's merited. But it's an important relationship. Russia is not equally, but very close because of the strategic arms that we have, because they're drifting into less democracy, and they're a vitally important country for us with Iran right now. If sanctions are going to work in Iran, if the Russians are backing us, if they're not, they'll work a lot less.
Bill, you worked with the Chinese on North Korea. A lot of people complain that the Chinese have a mercantilistic foreign policy, that it's really about China Inc., about the bottom line. They're not taking responsibility. This is the accusation. We'll get into it tomorrow. Did you feel that was their primary motivation in North Korea? They weren't willing to upset the apple cart, use the influence they clearly have to force the North Koreans to back down? Or did you see something different?
No, I saw that, Nick. Here's one question that I have when I'll talk to somebody in the State Department who disagrees with me. I happen to think that China doesn't have the influence we think they have with North Korea. That's my view. And I say, well, what makes you think China will want to help us with North Korea? They want to keep things stirred up there. Plus, China doesn't want the collapse of North Korea, because that's going to be millions of refugees into China. And, China still has some poverty problems they got to deal with. So I think China enjoys the sort of the tension, because they have designs on North Asia. They want to be strong and powerful. They're boosting their military. And I don't think they're coming close to us. But they want to see their influence, mercantilistic, but also strategic, increase. So I have a different view of China's leverage of North Korea. I think the leverage that exists there is a package that is constructed by the United States that involves, all right, North Korea, in exchange for you dropping these nuclear weapons or reducing it, yeah, we'll help you with your poor people. We'll give you some energy. We'll give you some food. And that's the best you can do. I don't know if there's a better solution.
Good. I think we're going to go to another question from one of our remote locations. And it's from Mackenzie Rockcliffe in Orono, the University of Maine in Orono. What do you think of Hillary Clinton's State Department? And let me just add, Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, how has she done?
I think she's done a good job. I also think the State Department has recuperated its luster. In the Bush administration, I had felt that the Defense Department in Iraq and Afghanistan was running the show. And I sense now that the State Department is back on policy. I do believe that is the main vehicle. I like the fact that AID, which I know there are a lot of AID people here, is now working closer with the State Department, basically under the State. I think that's healthy. It made no sense. The only area in the State Department that I'd like to see revamped is what is called the old USIA. We have these Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Cuba, Radio Free everything, right? I don't think they work. I think the way to communicate with countries, with young people, with movements is social media, is new ways of finding to spread the American message of democratic values. But I give the State Department good marks and Secretary Clinton good marks.
Good, thank you. Over here, yes.
Matt Storin from Camden. I'm tempted to ask you whether Hillary's speaking to you yet, but that's not really my question.
Hillary speaks to me. Bill doesn't.
Okay. On Iran, are there any steps that you think the U.S. can take to get China and Russia to be part of the solution instead of the problem? Or how do you think that whole situation will play out?
All right, you ask yourself, why do Russia and China veto resolutions or don't want to put stronger sanctions? The answer with Russia is because they buy fuel from Iran and they buy weapons from Iran. And China buys a lot of their energy from Iran. They also buy weapons, and they do a bunch of other, I won't say illicit trade, but it's mercantilistic. It's foreign policy that, as I said, Syria, we used to be in the Middle East, the Russians would compete against us for influence. I think, for instance, the veto on Syria by Russia, by China, if they ever want to get a foothold in the Middle East, those two countries, they're going to have serious problems. They're not going to be able to with those vetoes. I think they're devastating.
Thank you. Yes, up on the balcony.
Kyle Stetson, UMaine Orono. You talked about decreasing polarization. How do we do that in the face of organizations like the 99% and the Occupy movement? And what, if any, effect have they had on the political process?
I think the 99%, 1% is a good movement. Do I think it's going to stay that way? No, I think it'll subsume itself after the elections. Look, I'm not condoning some of the things they've said. I know that a lot of them are there for economic reasons. It's the economy. I think they've sent a message to the political leadership that has reached, I won't say dramatically. Now, do I recommend you as a young person to go out there? I think it's your own choice. As long as it's civil, as long as it's peaceful, as long as it's issue-oriented. My suggestion would be, instead of occupying a park, is get involved in a political race or run yourself.
Yeah.
Try to make changes that way.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sorry.
Cindy Williams from Sprucehead, Maine, and Beverly, Massachusetts. And the world continues to look to us to lead. And there have been a lot of countries going through the Arab Spring with a lot of different cultures and political situations. Do we have a foreign policy about what's going to happen on the other side of the Arab Spring, and is it nuanced?
I had, you mentioned my suggestions to the State Department. I had been one of those. I think I wrote a letter with a couple of other former officials saying that we needed, at the State Department, a coordinator for the Arab Spring. In other words, somebody that does exactly what you say. What's our policy if there's an Arab Spring in this country? We can't just have 14 different policies, although many of these countries are different. But I do think that this is a movement that, if you look at the whole Middle East, if you look at the Gulf states, potentially it could spread, and we better have a policy. Now, I think our response on Libya was good. I think our response on Egypt was good, although it's kind of falling apart. Read Nick's column today. It's these generals, we give them up $1.3 billion a year, and they're turning on us. Now, I hear that some of them are mad because they think we sold out Mubarak, their guy. I don't know. I haven't been there. Nick, you ought to answer her question, Nikki. What do you think?
A real politician.
No, because I think that's a very good question.
I'll be very brief. This group will hear from me tomorrow, but I think the president's done very well in an impossible situation because we've got competing demands. In some countries, as Bill said, in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, the president threw our support to young people for hope, for democracy, and it worked out well in Tunisia. It may work out well in Libya. It's not working out so well, at least right now, in Egypt. On the other hand, we have other concrete interests, flow of oil from the Gulf, blocking Iran, and so therefore the president did not put a lot of pressure on Bahrain, on Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, because we've got concrete interests, and I don't blame him for that necessarily, but he's balancing these competing interests. It's a difficult thing to do. He's been doing it for a year, but I think fairly effective.
Although I will disagree a little bit with Nick here, because I think we should get ahead, for instance, on some of the Gulf states. They're great allies, they're friends, they give us oil. Saudi Arabia, hey, don't worry, America, we'll increase oil production. Don't worry about Iran, we'll just increase it by 2% and you'll be fine. Well, they're also getting $120 per barrel, and they've got their own motives. But, I read the other day, Saudi Arabia has no women in the Olympics. Where's the international community? Somebody should say, well, that's not right. So that's where I want us. It doesn't have to be public. You don't have to humiliate. You say, hey, get with it. There's a new world out there, and it's going to be good. You're America's ally, Gulf state. For God's sakes, have an election where there's not just one candidate getting 98%. It's like, anyway, you know what I mean.
And yet if we push him too hard, then you don't have an ally against Iran. This is what makes
All
it
right,
very
but
complex for all of our presidents.
But it's okay to err on the side of our democratic values. That's what I think.
Yeah. Yes.
We've talked about Arab Spring. We've talked about Iran. How about Israel? Where are we going with Israel? Is there any way to break the power of AIPAC? Palestinians? Talk about that, please.
Okay, I worry about Israel. Here's why. Strong supporter. I just think it's a cornerstone of our policy in the Middle East. Now, that doesn't mean that Israel runs American foreign policy. What I do think is that today, Israel, its neighborhood is not friendly. Things have gotten worse around the neighborhood. You've got Hamas and Hezbollah pointing rockets. You've got Iran hostile. You've got Egypt no longer sort of the strategic partner that's going to boost Middle East peace negotiations. You've got the Israeli-Palestinian talks dead, almost. You've got elections in Israel, the United States, and Ramallah, the Palestinian areas, with until after those elections, there's not going to be movement on the Palestinian issue, which I think is vital. It's the key. Now, I think it's very important. America's role needs to continue to be the broker. And we are the only entity, I believe, that needs to push the Arab-Israeli peace process, and we need to do it stronger. Now, do I think that we should wink to Israel and say, okay, see those Iranian nuclear facilities? Why don't you, we'll wink. It's your decision. I think that would be unhealthy. I think it's unhealthy because I worry about if Israel goes after those Iranian nuclear facilities, what that's going to do is the Iranian opposition that is already fermenting and getting stronger in Iran is going to get nationalistic and support the government, and that's going to be unhealthy. And I worry about those rockets from Hamas and Hezbollah on Israel. I do. I worry that Egypt won't back us in terms of forging some kind of a peace. So I guess my answer is let's push the peace process. We got to wait till after elections. I mean, they've got their elections too, and Netanyahu is probably going to win. What kind of answer did you want me to give you? Or what do you think? Let me ask you that, because that was a good question.
Yeah, the mic, please. Thank you very much.
I was just there, and I felt like our governmental support for Israel was being countered by popular NGO Western finance support for the Palestinians. So you sense this dichotomy that that only increased the tension, and the tension is palpable there, absolutely palpable. And I don't see it. I see it as the spark, which could ignite a lot.
We work very closely with Israel. That's the good thing in terms of intelligence, in terms of coordinating. So even though there's this talk about a wink, I know, at least when I was around, we talked to them all the time. And it's a good, strong alliance. I wouldn't mess with our military assistance to them, use it as leverage. This is not the time to do it because the neighborhood is so dangerous right now. And there's such volatility in the Middle East. And you know, even with Syria, what happens in Syria is strategically important to our interests and to Israel's interests. You don't want a worse situation in Syria. But at the same time, Assad is so bad that I don't think it can get worse. And this is why I think we should foster the popular movements that are existing in Syria, right? And maybe Nikki can talk to you about this tomorrow, but it's a very good question.
We're almost out of time, but we're going to take a few more questions. We have a question from a remote location. We have at least 2 more here. And I think we should stay and take those questions. Don't you think so? It's a good discussion. So Tom Putnam from Rockland, Maine, where do you think Turkey will be in 2015? You mentioned Turkey as one of the rising powers. Key country uniting both Europe and the Middle East.
They've got a leader there. His name is Erdogan. He is strong. This guy is bold. This guy is out there very, very, I am the leader of the Muslim world, almost. I think that's healthy. Now, I worry one part about this new leadership role. One, I want them to be stronger and in their relationship with us and with Israel. And I see a little bit of a weakening there. On the other hand, I think with Syria, what Turkey does, if Turkey creates a buffer zone for those refugees from Syria, I think that's very good. And if we help Turkey, we work with Turkey in establishing those corridors, humanitarian corridors, I think that's going to be very good. But their economy is booming. The problem is Turkey's economy is better than the European Union's economy, but the European Union won't let them in the European Union because they're still, they're Muslims, they're not European. It's like Hispanics feel. That's supposed to be funny. Anyway.
Yes, sir.
I'm Brian Walsh from Hanover, New Hampshire, and I want to go to, do we have what it takes, and the bankruptcy question. Most of what we've been talking about is the rest of the world tonight, but Simpson Bowles asked us all to sacrifice in many ways, and I think the tragedy of our political process now is it's give, 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 or make the other guy hurt. And I think our inability to ask for common sacrifice from all of us is what's really hurting us. Would you please comment on that?
Yeah, look, you ought to run for office. That was a great speech.
It was.
And I agree, and I agree, but here's something good, and I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture, but you know where fiscal responsibility exists in America? I bet you don't know where. You know where? In the States. In the States. Now, I don't know, is Maine not the case? Okay, but I don't know, I haven't followed, but look, in my state, as a governor, if I didn't have a balanced budget, I could have a citation by the legislature. Most states are required to have balanced budgets with our state resources. And so most states in America are responsible. Now, there's a federal component, which is much bigger, where obviously that is not happening. But yeah, I think the Simpson-Bowles is a prescription. I also think that sort of for insurance, and I know that I'll get a call from the DNC tomorrow, I'd like to see us establish by a date certain, not immediately, a constitutional amendment that balances the budget, that says, you know, in times of war, obviously you don't do it. In times, I don't know, national emergencies, but I think that's healthy, and that will send positive signals. I mean, when President Clinton had a successful economy, is because we had a surplus and a balanced budget. That sent enormously positive signals about the state of our economy.
Last question in the balcony. Yes.
Good evening, Governor. My name is Nate Wilds. I'm from the University of Maine. And as a public leader and statesman with arguably one of the most diverse backgrounds in recent history.
Keep going. That's good.
Right.
Good.
and a great green jacket, I might add. I was curious what personal characteristics and resume lines, if you will, that you're looking for in leaders that will help us succeed and have what it takes to succeed in the 21st century.
All right. So first, you. You're confident. You're strong. That's good. I would say that the best way you can change your community is to run for office yourself, okay? Now, it could be in the student council or county commission. I think the noblest act of a public official is to throw yourself into the arena. And yeah, you're going to get criticized and, you know, the tension, and you get scrutinized, you know. God, I remember in the presidential race 4 years ago, I was able to like shake hands in a rope line, or like I'd leave here and go shake your hands. Nobody would know what I'd say. But now with the social media and these little phones, I mean, poor Romney, he can't say hello to somebody without someone saying, oh, you know, the person reacted negatively to him saying hello, so he must have no support. So get in the arena yourself. So that's boldness. Secondly, have a sense of values. Don't don't look at the wind where things are going. This is where I stand. I have found that eventually, if you stick by your guns, you take tough positions, that is the best way to advance politically. Thirdly, education. You know, you're in a good school. If you want to get in public service, one of the things, although I guess things turned out okay, I wish I'd gone to law school. Because when I got to Congress, I saw all these other guys that were lawyers that were able to think better than I could synthesize. They would write bills better. I said, geez, well, I went to law. I learned this in law school. I went to grad school, to Fletcher School, which is very good. So I think a legal education for anybody in public service is good because it gives you those options. Now, the same way international affairs, public policy is good, but get in the arena when you're young, be hungry to change this country, to change things, have values, but don't wait for the party or the master politico in your community to say, young man, wait your turn. You go this next time. I'll go this time, and I'll get out in 2 years. Yeah, that guy is not going to get out. So you go when you think the timing is right. And I think to all the young people here, the fact that you're here this evening in this very prestigious conference is good because you care about issues, you care about policy, and that's a first step in a good career. And being a politician or being a diplomat or being a writer or being like Amory, who, you know, probably doesn't make much money, I don't think, but as a thinker is good, That's what you want. Wilkerson, where is Wilkerson? Okay, you heard I didn't do too well in Cuba, didn't you? I want to talk to you. Anyway, thank you for a great conference.
Okay. Good job, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you.